The loan officer sets the collateral assessment on the desk between them and slides it across without any particular drama, the way you slide something across a desk when the numbers on it are going to do the difficult work of the conversation, and you would prefer to let them do it rather than saying the same thing in words that carry more personal weight than a printed table. Dennis Hart looks at the assessment. He has been in this office before, across this desk, in conversations that were easier than this one, and in one that was harder. And he knows how to read a collateral table well enough to find the line he is looking for without being guided to it. The line he is looking for is the equipment section. He finds it, he reads it, he sets the paper back on the desk and looks at the loan officer, whose name is Carl Bremer, and who has been handling Dennis's operating account at this institution for 6 of the 11 years Dennis has been farming his family's ground. The Massey Ferguson equipment, a 6180 tractor that Dennis bought used 9 years ago and has run as his primary machine since, a 54-55 utility tractor purchased 4 years after that, and an older combine that has been through 2 engine overhauls and that Dennis considers the most reliable machine in his shed, is assessed in the collateral table at a combined value that is, in Carl Bremer's professional opinion, insufficient to meaningfully support the emergency operating line extension that Dennis is requesting. Carl does not say this with any satisfaction. He is a careful man and a fair one, and he has watched Dennis Hart farm his family's ground for 6 years with the kind of competence and discipline that a lender values in an agricultural customer, which makes this conversation harder rather than easier, because the difficulty Dennis is currently in is not the result of incompetent farming or undisciplined financial management. It is the result of a crop year that delivered 60% of the yield that Dennis's budget was built around, driven by a late-season drought that hit his specific geography harder than the regional average, and that his crop insurance coverage, structured around the regional average rather than his specific field performance, did not fully compensate. Dennis is short. He is not catastrophically short. He is short in the particular way that a well-managed operation on a tight margin gets short when the one variable it cannot control moves against it hard enough to create a gap between what the year generated and what the year required. He needs a bridge. He needs the operating line extended by enough to cover his input costs for the coming spring planting season and to carry his grain marketing position through the period when his stored grain from the difficult year is most likely to find pricing that reduces the overall loss. He has a plan. The plan is sound. The collateral, according to the table on Carl Bremer's desk, is not. Carl explains the bank's position in the careful language of institutional lending, which is precise and not unkind, but which arrives at the same place that all such explanations arrive, which is that the numbers as they stand do not support the requested extension at the level Dennis needs, and that the bank's options for restructuring the request into something it can approve are limited by the collateral gap that the equipment assessment reveals. He mentions the equipment specifically. He says that the older Massey Ferguson iron, while clearly functional and well-maintained based on what he knows of Dennis's operation, does not carry the market value on a collateral assessment that newer equipment of equivalent productive capacity would carry. Because collateral assessments are based on liquidation value in the regional used equipment market, and the regional used equipment market values age and hours in ways that do not account for the maintenance history or the operational condition of specific machines. Dennis knows this. He knew it before he came to this meeting. He came anyway because the meeting was required before the answer could be official, and Dennis does not conduct his affairs by avoiding conversations that he expects to be difficult. He came, he listened, he read the table, and now he is looking at Carl Bremer across the desk with the particular expression of a man who has received the answer he expected and is already thinking about what comes next, rather than about the answer itself. He thanks Carl for his time. He picks up his copy of the assessment, folds it, puts it in his jacket pocket, and drives back to the farm. It is a 40-minute drive, and Dennis spends most of it doing the specific kind of arithmetic that a farmer does when the conventional solution to a problem has been removed, and the unconventional solutions need to be identified and evaluated against what is actually available. The conventional solution was the operating line extension. The bank said no to the operating line extension, or more precisely said yes to a smaller version of it that does not solve the problem the original request was designed to solve. The unconventional solutions are the ones that involve doing with what he has, which is a farm, ground that is paid down if not paid off, a grain bin with last year's crop in it at a price he does not currently want to accept, and 3 pieces of Massey Ferguson equipment that a collateral assessor has valued at a number that does not reflect what Dennis knows those machines can do in the hands of someone who knows them completely. The input cost problem is the immediate one. Dennis's spring planting budget requires seed, fertilizer, and chemical at a combined cost that he cannot cover from his current operating account without the extension. He has 30 days before the input purchase window closes on the early payment discounts that represent a meaningful percentage of his total input cost. Missing those discounts is not a catastrophic outcome, but it is a real additional cost on top of the shortfall he is already managing, and Dennis does not intend to miss them if there is a way to avoid it. He calls his seed supplier that evening and has a conversation that is different from his conversation with Carl Bremer, because his seed supplier is a man who has done business with Dennis for 9 years and who extends trade credit on the basis of relationship and payment history, rather than on the basis of a collateral table produced by a bank's assessment methodology. The seed account gets extended. The conversation takes 12 minutes. Dennis makes a note in his farm financial records and moves to the next item on the list. The fertilizer is more complicated because the quantities involved are larger, and the supplier relationship, while solid, does not have the same depth as the seed account. Dennis approaches the fertilizer conversation differently. He does not ask for extended payment terms on the full spring requirement. He restructures his application plan, reducing his fall anhydrous commitment from the previous year's rate, substituting a split application strategy that moves some of the nitrogen requirement to a side dress application in early summer that he will fund from grain sales he expects to make between now and then. The split application is agronomically sound on his ground. He has soil data going back 8 years that supports the nitrogen timing flexibility, and it converts a large immediate payment into a smaller immediate payment and a larger deferred payment that the season's cash flow can absorb without the operating line extension the bank declined. He calls his agronomist to confirm the application rate adjustment is within the range the soil data supports. The agronomist confirms it. Dennis places the modified fertilizer order and makes the reduced deposit from his operating account, which has enough margin for the deposit but not for the full original commitment. The chemical budget is where the Massey Ferguson equipment enters the solution in the most direct way. Dennis's standard practice for his herbicide and fungicide applications has been to contract those passes to a custom application service, which is a common practice for operations his size that cannot justify the capital cost of a dedicated application rig, but that need timely, accurate chemical placement across their acreage. The custom application service costs money, per acre money, that adds up across his full planted acres to a line item in his operating budget that he has always justified on the basis of timeliness and application accuracy, and the opportunity cost of not having his primary equipment tied up in chemical application during periods when it needs to be doing other field work. That justification exists in a budget that has an operating line extension available to fund it. In a budget that does not have the extension, the custom application service is a discretionary cost that can potentially be replaced by Dennis doing his own application work using equipment he already owns. The 5455 utility tractor can pull his older 3-point boom sprayer, a piece of equipment that has been sitting in the back of his shed, used only occasionally for the past 4 years, since he shifted the primary application work to the custom service. Dennis pulls the sprayer out of the shed the weekend after the bank meeting and goes through it with the same systematic attention he gives every piece of equipment before putting it back into service after an extended idle period. He checks the pump, which runs correctly but shows wear on the diaphragm that he addresses with a rebuild kit purchased from the local co-op. He checks the boom sections, finding one nozzle body cracked from a freeze event that he replaces with a correct replacement nozzle from the same co-op. He flushes the tank and the lines, calibrates the flow rate at the application pressure he will use, and confirms that the boom height is consistent across its full width, using the method his father taught him 20 years ago, which involves a tape measure and a level surface and patience, rather than any electronic measurement system. The sprayer is functional. The 5455 has the hydraulic capacity to operate it correctly. Dennis can do his own chemical applications. He does the math on what this saves. The custom application service on his full planted acreage, at the per acre rate he has been paying, represents a cost that covers a significant portion of his remaining input budget gap when it is removed from the expense side of the calculation. It does not cover all of it. But combined with the seed account extension, the fertilizer application restructuring, and one additional decision that Dennis makes during the same weekend he is going through the sprayer, it covers enough of it that the spring planting season becomes executable without the operating line extension the bank declined to provide at the level he needed. The additional decision involves his custom hire arrangement for his grain cart operation during harvest. Dennis has been hiring a neighbor to run the grain cart alongside his combine during peak harvest days, which allows the combine to run continuously without stopping to unload into the truck. It is an efficiency that shows up in harvest speed and therefore in the timeliness of getting his crop out of the field during the optimal harvest window. And it is an efficiency that costs him the neighbor's daily rate plus fuel for the neighbor's tractor across the harvest days when the arrangement is active. Dennis decides to eliminate this arrangement for the coming harvest and to run a modified harvest operation where the combine stops to unload directly into the truck at field edge rather than continuous flow unloading into a moving grain cart. He will lose some harvest efficiency. The loss is real, and he quantifies it honestly against the days of the harvest, where the weather window is tight enough that the efficiency difference matters. On most days, it does not matter enough to justify the cost of the arrangement. On the days when it does matter, Dennis will manage the schedule to prioritize continuous operation during the tight windows by pre-positioning the truck at field edge in a way that minimizes the combine's waiting time at each unload stop. It is not elegant. It is not the most efficient way to run a harvest, but it is executable with the equipment and the labor he already has, and executable at a cost that fits inside the financial structure he's working within. He puts the crop in. The planting season runs from late April through the second week of May across his full acreage, with the 6180 running the planter and the 5455 handling the support work that the planting operation requires. The 6180 has been his primary machine for 9 years, and he knows it in the specific way that 9 years of daily contact with a piece of equipment produces, which is past the operator's manual and past the service specification and into the particular responsiveness of that specific machine under the range of conditions his ground and his operation create. The planting goes well, the seed placement is correct, the soil conditions are as good as a dry spring that followed a drought year can produce, which is not ideal but is workable. And Dennis manages the field sequence to prioritize the ground with the best early soil moisture and work toward the drier ground as the season progresses, an agronomic judgment call that costs him nothing beyond the decision itself. The chemical applications go on schedule through May and into early June, Dennis running the 5455 and the boom sprayer himself across his full acreage, working early mornings when the wind conditions are suitable for herbicide application, and shifting to other farm tasks during the midday hours when the wind does not cooperate. He is slower than the custom service would have been. He applies this consideration to his schedule rather than his bank account, running longer days and earlier starts to maintain the application timing his weed management program requires. The applications go on. The coverage is adequate. The calibration work he did on the sprayer before the season pays off in consistent application rates across the acreage that his summer crop scouting will confirm are producing the weed control he needed. By the time his growing crop is closed canopy in July, and the input purchase window and the application season are both behind him, Dennis Hart has spent the spring completing a planting and establishment season without the operating line extension that Carl Bremer's collateral table said his equipment could not support. He has done it by converting the productive capacity of his Massey Ferguson equipment from a collateral value that the bank assessed as insufficient into an operational value that the bank's methodology has no column for. Because the bank's methodology measures what equipment is worth if it needs to be liquidated, and has no way to measure what equipment is worth to the person who knows it completely and uses it to replace costs that a well-capitalized operation pays someone else to cover. The 6180 planted the crop. The 5455 applied the chemistry. The combine will harvest the result. The bank assessed all three machines at a number that did not move the needle on a collateral calculation. Dennis used all three machines to make a planting season work that the collateral calculation said he could not fund. The crop comes in well, not a record year, not the kind of year that restores a difficult prior year in a single harvest and returns an operation to its previous financial position with room to spare. A solid year. A year where the yield comes in above Dennis's break-even on his planted acres, where the grain marketing decisions he has been managing through the stored position from the previous year and the new crop from this one produce a combined revenue that closes the gap the drought year opened without requiring additional debt. By October, when the bins are full and the combine is cleaned out and the numbers for the season are clear enough to calculate, Dennis's operating account is in a position that the spring's bank meeting would not have suggested was reachable without the extended credit he was denied. Carl Bremer calls in November about the annual operating account review. The conversation is different from the February meeting in the way that conversations are different when the numbers have moved in the right direction between one meeting and the next. Carl notes the operating account position, notes the grain marketing outcome, asks Dennis about his equipment plans for the coming year. Dennis says his equipment plans are the same as they have been for 9 years, which is to maintain what he has and replace it when it gives him a reason to, rather than when a depreciation schedule or a trading cycle says it is time. Carl says that sounds like a reasonable approach. Dennis does not say what he is thinking, which is that the approach Carl is now describing as reasonable is the approach that produced the equipment the bank valued at a number that did not move the needle on a collateral table 8 months ago, and that Dennis then used to execute a planting season the bank did not believe his resources could support. He does not say it because saying it does not improve anything, and Dennis is not a man who spends energy on points already proven. The season proved it. The numbers on Carl Bremer's screen proved it. The Massey Ferguson equipment is still in the shed, maintained to the same standard it has always been maintained to, ready for spring in the way that a machine is ready when the person responsible for it has never allowed it to become otherwise. The bank will assess it again next year at a number that reflects its age and its hours and its position in the regional used equipment market. Dennis will look at that number and think about what he knows about those machines that the number does not contain, which is everything that matters when the operating line falls short and the equipment is the only resource left that can close the gap between what the year requires and what the year will provide.